If you downloaded the notes that I've got up on the board, you will see that I kind of went crazy this week. I started looking at our study, and I ran across, we're going to be talking about, the miracles that Jesus did. We're going to be talking about his ministry in Galilee, and then the fact that he talked in parables, and I started saying, this is kind of interesting. So I'd do a little search, and I would find all kinds of things, and then I said, I think this might be interesting to share with the class if they have it or not, but if you download it, you're going to find there's about 15 pages. And the majority of them, I've got all the places that Jesus taught, and I've got them grouped by their settings, whether or not he taught in religious centers or the temple or the mountains or and then I got another chart that shows all the miracles that Jesus did, and I've got those grouped together by the topic, like healing miracles or miracles over nature. And then I ran across some of the parables, and so I grouped all those together for you. So I've got parables relating to the kingdom of heaven, salvation and grace, forgiveness and mercy. And so if you've ever wanted that list in a handy format, you've got it if you just take a moment to download it. So we're not going to be going through all that this evening. I'm doing good to get through what I've got and remember what I've got. That's the problem I have in my old age, is remembering what I do. Heard a good one today. This guy said, it's artificial intelligence. You can find out everything in the world that you ever want to know with artificial intelligence. He says, I don't need it. I've got my wife. So I thought I'd share that.
I figured you were just gonna say, but he can't tell me why I came in this room.
Well, that's true. That's a lot of truth to that. Anyway, you got somebody still taking a picture? Okay. Well, we're going to be talking about his ministry in Galilee and the prophecy concerning that. The fact that he's going to be a worker of miracles. He taught in parables, and that he was indeed a light to the Gentiles. And, there was a map too at the end of this thing. He talks about Naphtali and Zebulun being overrun by the Syrians. And I thought that was kind of interesting, so I put a map in there, and I forgot to put it into my notes. But if you download this, on the very last page, you'll see one map that shows the outline of the 12 tribes and their inheritance. And then next to it, you'll see another map that has the three invasions that Syria made into Israel to conquer them. And you'll see that one of those invasions goes right through Naphtali and Zebulun, just like Isaiah said it would happen. And then another invasion through the coastlines. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. And like I said, I neglected to put those on the slides. That's had a lot of other things going on today. But when we look at this, we see that the types and shadows that we'll see in Isaiah chapter 9, verses 1 through 2, that it is kind of a type and shadow of what was happening not only in this time of Israel, but also what was going to happen in the future. Then we'll have places where Jesus taught, miracles of Jesus, parables, and then the map. That's what we have. And we talked about it in the introduction there. So we look at the ministry of Jesus in Galilee. We see in Isaiah chapter 9, verses 1 and 2, he says, nevertheless, the dimness shall not be such as was in her vexation. When at the first he lightly afflicted the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterward did more grievously afflict her by the way of the sea, beyond Jordan, in Galilee of the nations. The people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, on them has a light shined. So we see what Isaiah was prophesying about, what was going to happen to Naphtali and Zebulun, but we're also seeing that because of that, they fall into darkness. And but he says, don't worry, because there's going to be a time in which the light will shine and they will come out of this. So the prophecy was being fulfilled in Christ. So when we look at the historical background, the darkness and the affliction, the 12 tribes of Israel were among the first to be conquered by the Assyrians. We see this in 2 Kings chapter 15 and verse 29. They were the border regions. They were the regions up against Assyria. And when Assyria invaded, that was the first place they came through. And so we see it describes two stages of judgment. The early invasions, then later the full devastation and exile of the nation of Israel and Judah. So we see this in those two maps, if I hadn't put them on the thing, but I forgot to do that. Now, geographically, Isaiah says, by way of the sea. Now, we think of this as the trade route near the Sea of Galilee. And beyond the Jordan, it's referred to as the east of the side of the Jordan River. Like I said, I have my map up there, I'll point them out to you. But then he says Galilee of the nations. Now, Galilee became inhabited quite heavily by the Gentiles. We do know, if you remember from our study from 2 Samuel, that the Philistines pretty much had their run of the field of their land in Judea and I think part of the northern kingdom just before David, or I guess when David began to have his rule and he began to drive them out. During the time of Saul, that it was difficult for them to say this land is not inhabited by Gentiles, because they were there and they were creating problems. And because of this, he says, the Galilee of the nations, they would become heavily mixed with Gentiles, and because of this, the region would become spiritually dark and politically oppressed and religiously compromised because of the idolatry. I see people fanning, so I guess we're a little warm tonight. Maybe that'll help. We set on 75, I think. So that's where they stood at during the time that Isaiah prophesied this and in the years to come. Now the prophecy would have a turning point, and this turning point would be from darkness to light. When he says that the people that walked in darkness will now see the light or have the light. Now, darkness here means the ignorance of God and the oppression, sin, and hopelessness. This is what we see in that verse in Isaiah. And the people will have seen great light. Now, the great light represents divine revelation and salvation and the coming of the Messiah. And it also shows that God is intervening in their lives to bring them the Messiah. So the people, when they faced the realization that they were going to go into captivity and they were going to lose their land and life just took a 180 on them, they began to despair with what they had. So in Isaiah, he promised them that even though this is going to happen to you, don't worry, it's not the end of your existence as a nation or the promises that I've made to Abraham. Now, the fulfillment of what we see in Isaiah, we can find in Matthew chapter 4. And now Matthew says this statement, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by Isaiah. Now, this occurred about the time when Jesus left Nazareth and settled in Capernaum by the Galilee. Now, I got a little bit later in the slide, but to kind of give you an idea, Jesus was raised in Nazareth, which is in Galilee. And he began his teachings in Galilee. He began to get his disciples in the region of Galilee. So the prophecy of Isaiah said the light was going to come out of Galilee, and sure enough it did, because Jesus fit that particular part of the prophecy. Now, the region that had first experienced the judgment of God by their captivity now became the region to first receive the Messiah. So they were the ones that were first conquered by the Assyrians and bore the brunt of the war. Usually when the border countries are the first ones to get pretty much annihilated. Because not only did they put up a battle to try to stop the Assyrians, they were overcome, and then just the waves just kept coming in through their land. So they were pretty much the ones that catch the brunt of the battle. But he says now the ones that caught the worst of the judgment of God now becomes the first to receive the blessings of God through the Messiah. So the prophecy teaches us several truths. First of all, that God brings hope where judgment failed. So the judgment fell upon you, now God brings hope because of your situation. And as our author says, he says sometimes the worst places often become the starting point of redemption. And when we look at our lives in that same respect, generally the ones that have reached the depths of despair are the ones that reach out and begin to see the light and become receptive and become grounded in the faith. For some reason, that just seems to be a situation that I've seen. Not always, but that seems to be a thing. That they don't have anything to look to for hope, for salvation when they see the gospel and the promises of Christ, and now they see a chance of redemption, and they see the light that makes their lives better. So the Messiah's light symbolizes these things. First of all, it symbolizes truth, light, life, salvation, and God's presence. Jesus said, I am the light of the world, in John chapter 8 and verse 12. Now, this salvation not only was given to the Jews, but it was extended to the nations round about them. The Galilee of the nations, as Isaiah mentions. It hints at the Messiah's mission that would be not only to the Jews, but would also go out into the world and to the Gentiles. And this was fulfilled in the gospel message, and we'll see that in just a moment. Now, to summarize Isaiah chapter 9, verses 1 through 2, the northern Israel suffered greatly under the invasion, and God promised that same region would later receive the Messiah, and that Jesus fulfilled this when he began his teaching in Galilee. Now, Jesus was a worker of miracles, and I don't think there's anything that we can deny about that. There's well documented the miracles that he had performed. When we look in Isaiah 35, verses 5 through 6, Isaiah says, say to them that are fearful, that are of a fearful heart, be strong, fear not, behold your God will come with vengeance, even God with a recompense, he will come to save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap as an hart, and the tongue of the dumb will sing. For in the wilderness shall waters break out, and streams in the desert. So now we see Isaiah showing us, or at least showing the Israelites that they should not be fearful of heart, even though all of these things have happened to you. Don't worry about God's vengeance, because he will bring you back into the fold, so to speak. And you will see this in the Messiah by characteristics and aspects of the things that he does. And in this we see these particular miracles. And he kind of sums it up like this. He says it's going to be not just some insignificant miracle happening here, but it's going to be like in the wilderness, the waters break forth. In the desert, there'll be huge streams. It's going to be something that's going to be not easily to overlook. So Isaiah lists 4 specific things. He says that the eyes of the blind will be open. And we see that Jesus healed multiple blind people. John chapter 9, Matthew chapter 9. He says that the ears of the deaf will be unstopped. We see that Jesus healed a deaf mute, Mark chapter 7. The lame man will leap. Jesus healed paralytics, Mark 2 and John 5. And then he says the tongue of the dumb will sing. And we see where Jesus restored the speech to those that were unable to talk in Matthew chapter 9. So what Isaiah said was going to happen with the Messiah is now being fulfilled in the Messiah. So Jesus was indeed a worker of miracles. If you want to see that list, look at the end of your notes, you'll see the list of his miracles. Now, concerning the credentials of the Messiah, you know, we've always kind of wondered, why did John send his disciples to Jesus and ask him, are you the one that we're looking for? Because that would kind of seem redundant, because at the baptism of Jesus, John pointed out that this was the Son of God. He witnessed the descending of the Holy Spirit upon Jesus, and without, I think, doubt in John's mind that he was in the presence of the Messiah. So, you know, there was a lot of speculation. I've heard over the years that maybe John sent these disciples over there to encourage the disciples, or John just wasn't sure and he wanted to get Jesus to tell him that it was true, that he was the Messiah. We just don't know. But the writer of our book points out one thing I thought was kind of interesting, and it very well could be the way John found himself. Here was a man that was in the wilderness. He was preaching boldly. He was standing up against the Jewish leaders. He was proclaiming the coming of the Messiah. John was a brave man. He was a straight to the point. He didn't, you know, beat around the bush kind of guy. But now he found himself in prison, locked up with, you know, a very small cell, and he found himself there, and he's beginning to hear all of these things happening out in the world, and that Jesus was doing. And having seen this, but yet hearing these miracles and not witnessing them, I guess he's beginning to question, is this indeed, is these things actually happening? Are these things true? And he even goes to the point of saying that, I don't know if I have it in here or not, of even coming to the point that great men like Moses and Elijah, you know, these people at one point in their life, very strong men, found themselves in points of despair. And John may have found himself this way. And when he goes, sends these people to Jesus, Jesus answered by pointing to these very miracles. He says, tell John that these people are receiving their sight, the lame are walking, those that are dumb that are speaking. All of these miracles that Isaiah prophesied are happening. So the writer clearly connects, that is Matthew, clearly connects Isaiah 35 to the ministry of Jesus. Now, this imagery, water in the wilderness, kind of gives us the idea that where life where there was death now becomes hope. Hope where there was barrenness. When the land was bare, the waters of the wilderness brings hope, it brings life. God's presence transforms desolation. And in prophecy, water often symbolizes salvation and the Spirit, Isaiah 44 and John 7. It also anticipates the spread of the gospel, and this includes the Gentile world. So when we say the waters in the wilderness, we see that where there was barren land, where there was no growth, just desolate, now we see fertility happening, we see growth, we see activity, and we see prosperity. So the waters in the wilderness, the imagery shows us that the coming of the Messiah will bring great things. It also describes the conditions in the age of the Messiah. It shows us that there will be healing, joy, holiness, and restoration, and a return to God. So this passage parallels Isaiah 11 and Isaiah 9, all describing the reign of the Messiah. So when we look at what the reign of the Messiah is going to look at, these three passages gives us a good picture of it. And so lost my train of thought on that one. But anyway, that's what the Messianic age was going to bring about. Now, the miracles of Jesus were not merely miracles of, acts of compassion. We think about Jesus being a compassionate person. He was. But they also did something else too. They proved that God had come among the people, that the Messianic kingdom had began, and the prophecy was being fulfilled exactly as it had been stated in the Old Testament. In fact, Peter later preached that Jesus, a man attested by God with miracles. Acts chapter 2 and verse 22. So we see that Jesus was proven by the miracles in which he had done, and these miracles were prophesied by Isaiah in the Old Testament. And as I said before, if you remember anything, just remember the dating of the Septuagint. Those passages were written before the coming of the Christ, and we know that they are prophetic in nature, not something written afterwards. So Isaiah 35, 5 through 6, to summarize it, teaches us that when the Messiah comes, miraculous healings will occur. That when he comes, that Jesus would fulfill these signs during his ministry. The miracles also represent spiritual salvation and restoration, and the prophecy announces the arrival of God's kingdom. So that's kind of summarizing what we see in Isaiah chapter 35, and we see it fulfilled in Matthew. In Matthew 11, verses 2 through 5, Matthew says, "And when John had heard in the prison the works of Christ, he sent 2 of his disciples and said to him, 'Are you he that should come, or do we look for another?' Jesus answered and said to them, 'Go and show John again those things which you do hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, and the dead are raised, and the poor have the gospel preached to them.'" So as we said earlier, Galilee was important in Jesus' life. After learning of John's arrest, we see that Jesus left Judea and went back to Galilee. And as I mentioned before, he was raised in Galilee, he chose his disciples there, and he went throughout Galilee teaching and healing. We see that in Mark 2, Luke chapter 2, Mark 1, and then Matthew chapter 4. So why did John ask this question of Jesus? We talked about that a while ago. Shows us that even great men sometimes fell in their strongest points. Even Peter fell in his steadfastness. So whatever the reason may have been when John was in prison, John and his disciples must have been gained strength from this answer. When the disciples went and met with Jesus, and Jesus told them to tell John that these things were happening, they went back and told John, and John, because of the faithfulness and truthfulness of the disciples, believed what they had said, and I'm sure that strengthened him in his last days while he sat in that prison. So whatever the reason may be that he sent to him, the end result was that I think he and his disciples gained strength from that answer. So, excuse me. Miracles prove Jesus' identity. Each miracle category shows or proves something about Jesus' identity. For example, a miracle, when it says the blind see, the meaning of that is not only did that individual receive sight, but it shows us, I think, in a spiritual sense, that spiritual light has now come into the people. Where the blind that couldn't see are now seeing. The lame are now walking. We see the power to restore humanity back to a position in a relationship with God. The lepers are being cleansed, authority over uncleanness, over sin. We see deaf beginning to hear. We now hear the revelation from God. The dead raised, we see authority over life and death. And the poor hear the gospel. Now the kingdom is available to all, not only to the poor, but to the rich, to anyone that will be receptive to it. So if you kind of look at what Jesus is saying is happening in the sense physically among the people, there could be a spiritual significance to that. And I thought it would be interesting to bring that out to us and point out these meanings. And finally, we see that he was a teacher of parables. Psalm 78 verse 2, he says, "I will open my mouth in a parable, and I will utter dark sayings of old." Now, Psalm 78 is called a Mystical of Asaph. Now, A mystical was a song written to teach and to edify. We sing hymns today, and they're to teach and to edify in the hymns that we sing. Asaph, about whom was a singer and a cymbal player, he was also a seer and an inspired writer of several songs. And we see this in several of these passages. So it's a little bit about the man. Don't know a whole lot about him, but other than the fact that he wrote some songs, we also know that because of the fact that he was an inspired writer and seer, shows us that God did work through him in revealing some of these prophecies concerning the coming of Christ. So what was Asaph saying when he made that statement, I will open my mouth in a parable and I will utter dark sayings of old? Well, he's really telling us two things. First of all, he says, I will speak in parables. And a parable we know is a story or a comparison that reveals truth through an illustration. Sometimes when we are given a parable, we walk away from it and we start meditating on it and we start thinking about the implication of what that parable teaches us. And so it's not so much as you do this and that's the end of it. Now he's given us an illustration that we begin to expound and build upon to understand these truths. And the utter dark sayings that he mentions, he says that the Hebrew word means hidden truths, riddles, mysteries that require thought. So dark sayings is not something that's evil and you think of something dark, but it means something that is hidden is now become revealed to us. It's spoken in riddles, that is in parables, and it's requiring us to think about what we've heard and what we've learned. So Asaph is saying, I will teach profound lessons from Israel's history that reveal deeper spiritual truths that will require reflection and spiritual insight. So that's what he was saying in that particular psalm. So how does that apply to Christ and his fulfillment? Matthew 13, verses 34 through 35 says, all these things spoke Jesus to the multitude in parables, and without a parable spoke not to them. But that it might be fulfilled, that was spoken by the prophet, saying, I will open my mouth in parables, and I will utter things which have been kept secret from the foundation of the world. So that's what Asaph had prophesied that the Messiah would do. Speak in parables, and he would reveal things that had been kept from the sight of man, from the hearing of man, even from the foundation of the world. And when we think about that, think about God's plan of redemption. Before the creation, he knew exactly what he was going to do and how he was going to redeem man and show the glory of God before heaven and before man, in the worthiness of God to be our God. So we see the secrets being kept from man and being revealed a little bit at a time until we hit the New Testament and the coming of the Messiah, and the gospel age begins, and then the fulfillment of these secrets being revealed to us, have been revealed to us. So the dark sayings of old, deeper meaning. And we know that Jesus was the ultimate teacher in revealing things about God's kingdom. His parables often revealed the nature of his kingdom. It revealed judgment and salvation. It revealed the attitude of man's heart, their character and integrity, and also the history of redemption. And then finally, the light to the Gentiles, Isaiah 49, verse 6. He says, it is a light thing that you should be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob and to restore and preserve the preserved of Israel. He says, I will also give you for a light to the Gentiles, that you may be my salvation to the end of the earth. Again, Isaiah is showing that not only would the tribes of Jacob be restored and preserved, but also that this light would go to the Gentiles and they themselves would find their salvation. In other words, the Israelites, or at least the Jews, were thinking that the Messiah was going to be specifically for them, and that the world would benefit from them, with the Messiah being their king. That's kind of the concept that I'm getting from the thought of the Jews at Jesus' time. But Isaiah said that's not true, because it's going to go out and the whole Gentile world is going to be blessed as equally as you are blessed through your obedience to him. So in the preceding chapter of verse 49, kind of what's leading up to what Isaiah prophesied here. He said that the deliverance of the Jews from captivity would happen. He says that Cyrus was God's anointed, and he would be the one to bring about this release or this return of Israel to their nation. Many of the predicted blessings that Isaiah provided would have an immediate reference not only to their delivery from captivity, but also into the future. So we have a higher fulfillment of this particular verse that meant that the world would be delivered from the bondage of sin through the Messiah or through Jesus. So we see the fulfillment of that in Acts chapter 13. He says, but when the Jews saw the crowds, they were filled with jealousy and began contradicting the things spoken by Paul and blaspheming. Paul and Barnabas spoke out boldly and said, it was necessary that the word of God be spoken to you first, that is to the Jews. Since you repudiate it and judge yourselves unworthy of eternal life, behold, we are turning to the Gentiles. For so the Lord has commanded us, I have placed you as a light to the Gentiles, that you may bring salvation to the ends of the earth. So we see Isaiah 49 now being fulfilled in Acts chapter 13. So the Messiah in the gospel age that was prophesied so many years before, we see fulfilled in the ministry of Christ, in the spreading of his gospel through those that preach his word. So what we see here is that in Antioch of Pisidia, Paul and Barnabas demonstrated that Jesus was the fulfillment of that to which the law and the prophets had spoken. Certain of the Jews began to contradict, blaspheme Paul. They quoted Isaiah 49 verse 6, said they're turning to the Gentiles. And as prophesied, the light of the Gentiles was presented to the Jews first and then went to the Gentiles. So in concluding of all this, many of the Messianic prophecies has a dual fulfillment. And again, we see that in what Isaiah says, that Christ is seen to have fulfilled the prophecies as a worker of miracles, teaching in parables, and being the light of the Gentiles. Now, some may say that the prophecy was chosen to fit the man. You may have someone stand up doing something, and they go back and they find something and then make the application to it. But you cannot deny the prophecies that shows that Jesus performed the miracles and the areas in which he taught. It shows that Jesus to be the Messiah. You just cannot deny the miracles that were performed. So that concludes chapter 4 on his ministry. So what do y'all think? Comments, questions?
Pretty good, dude.
I don't know about that, but the thing that I got out of this is that my worst enemy is the rabbit trails. And when I started thinking about the miracles, I got thinking, well, what were all the miracles that he did, you know? And so I went and found them, and I said, well, I need to categorize these for the class. And then I got to thinking, well, where did all the places that Jesus preached? So I went and found all that and brought it to the class. And I think that even though I don't go through all of that with you, if I can give you that information and you have it handy, you know, you can print it out and put it in a folder someplace if that's what you like to do. But to have it on hand, it's a good reference material. And I think that by having that, you'll find edification in it down the road. Yes, ma'am?
I was just gonna say, you know, in Psalm 78:2, when it ends, I will utter dark sayings of old, and we look at that and go, what? You know, what is that? But then in Matthew 13, when it says this was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet, and it explains it so much better, I think, where it says, I will utter things hidden since the foundation of the world. So you already said that, but I just,
I was fixing to say, did Matthew explain it better than I did? He probably did. But, you know, looking at these prophecies and these types of shadows and antitypes, what you may want to call them, it's interesting that God wrote the Bible in the way that he did. Because the law of Moses in itself, you know, was very explicit that you do this, you don't do this, you don't do that. But then when you get to some of these other types of writings and other ways of writings, it makes you think. It's kind of like a parable. You walk away, you start meditating on it, you start thinking. Well, the same thing with some of these prophecies, it makes you think. You know, and whenever you're studying the prophets of the Old Testament, always keep in the back of your mind that there's always a possibility of a dual meaning to it. The immediate effect on the Israelites, and was he also showing this as an example of what's going to happen in the future? It's kind of like Melchizedek, you know, he shows up, no beginning, no end. He was a priest king, we know nothing else about him. And then under the law of Moses, the kingship and the priesthood is split apart to show that they will never be united under the law. And then when Christ comes, we see Melchizedek back again in his priesthood. Not to say that Jesus was Melchizedek, because I don't know that. But the characteristic of priest and king. So, you know, when you start seeing these things, it makes you think, makes you meditate, and I think it builds your intellect up in God's Word. Anyway, thank you for your comments, and we'll start chapter 5. Well, actually, we'll do chapter 5 come Sunday. Thank you for your time.